Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm just going to get this in full screen mode. Here we go. And we'll share again. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I am thrilled. If Lori Montgomery asks me to do something, I just feel like no is not an answer. She's an amazing colleague and friend and real ambassador, I think, of family physicians, and it's been cool to get to know her over the last few years. Um, I hope that this is interesting and relevant. And I'd love to make this interactive if we could, and just like enjoy. I'm not gonna use the whole time, so I think probably the amount of time that someone can pay attention to someone talking is about 40 minutes. So I'm shooting for 30 to 40 minutes for this talk, and then we can just like open it up for questions. But please feel free, like as you're thinking of things, just populate the chat and then we can engage. So it's always an honor to present to clinicians. To be honest, like this is my favorite thing to do. So I do workshops. I kind of travel the world, and speaking with clinicians is just so powerful, right? Because you are seeing so many people. If you think of all of us as a network and all of the people whose lives we can influence and touch, it's just so powerful. And you have a lot of power. So thank you for taking the time to go on this journey with me tonight. I am going to talk about trauma and pain. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey about what we know about this connection between trauma and pain, but you're going to see a crescendo about what we're learning about resilience, and how we may not only be able to break cycles of trauma and pain, but like even influence and break cycles across generations, which is really exciting. I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta. So I am a clinical psychologist. I moved here in 2015. Never thought I'd live in Alberta. I'm a newfie, born and raised. But this amazing opportunity came up at the Children's Hospital and the University of Calgary. Many of you may know of the Viradell Pain and Rehabilitation Center, which was established in the honor of a former nurse that worked at the hospital, Viradell. Around the time that she died, the family made this incredible donation to the Alberta Children's Hospital with the hope that we could really move the needle and make big changes in how children's pain and children with disabilities undergoing rehab were treated. And it's been remarkable to think about the changes that have been made. At the time that I came here, we were just trying to get people to care about children's pain, to be honest, to show it had a long-term impact, to really advocate for strategies to make it better. And we've come a long way. So I'm proud to say that the Alberta Children's Hospital was the second in the world to receive Child Kind designation for excellence in pain management and care. And I know there's excellent work going on all around the province in this regard. But there still are missing pieces, and mental health and developmental disabilities is really, and primary care are areas that we really want to target in this next iteration moving forward. So there's so much power that primary care physicians and clinicians have, because where do people go when they first present with pain, right? So I'm really excited to be talking to you guys today. A beautiful, important land acknowledgement that Nicole made. I always show this slide. We're all on stolen land. I am a settler. I put up this slide not only to acknowledge the land that we live and play and do our work on, but also to kind of put this topic in socio-political context. What we're learning is that pain is so much more than what's happening in your nervous system. We know that it's also influenced by, social factors, people, physicians, clinicians, culture, media. It's influenced by society and what's happening politically. And I think this is really important. And if we look at our Indigenous, communities in Canada, I think it's really, really a poignant example of how social structures and political and social movements can really influence the health and pain of generations upon generations upon generations. And I think you'll see that as we're moving through this topic, we need people at all levels of analysis. But I will tell you something I'm really passionate about is really understanding those broader societal structural factors, and partnering with people to look at all levels of this problem. I'm going to raise the compelling notion that what happened to your parent and your parents' parent and your great grandparents, in terms of trauma, may have the potential to get under the skin to influence your susceptibility to pain or resilience to it across generations. And we're learning more about this. I would, if I had to add another poll item, it would be how many of you work with children? Probably a minority, maybe some. If those who work with adults, I bet you if you ask them where their pain started, for a lot of them, they would say childhood, right? And we know that chronic pain tends to emerge in adolescence, around the time of puberty. And we know that about 1 in 5 kids, in community samples will report having things like headaches, musculoskeletal pain, abdominal pain, and this is sort of worldwide. Now, a smaller percentage are really impacted by that pain, but that's a pretty high number that kind of parallels what we see in adults. We know the rates of chronic pain are rising, as are the rates of mental health issues, right? The pandemic has certainly been a great catalyst in that regard. I know I'm preaching to the choir in that regard, but when we think about the rising epidemic of chronic pain, we have to consider how that intersects with the epidemic of mental health issues, trauma, and PTSD just being one example of that. We have shown that this is a huge societal problem, right? Like that chronic pain costs, in the US, $11 billion a year, and much, much higher if we look at indirect costs. What's really interesting is we now know what happens to these kids when they grow up. So it's really only been in the last 15 years or so that we've had really good longitudinal data following kids into adulthood. And we know that chronic pain in childhood, about 2/3 of kids will experience chronic pain into adulthood. And even if the pain resolves, these kids are at risk for like a higher risk for mental health issues into adulthood, from insomnia, PTSD, anxiety, depression, suicidality, opioid misuse. The data is really compelling, and we have some more coming out of Alberta to really show this. So chronic pain in and of itself in childhood is a risk factor for mental health issues into adulthood. This is some data. So a lot of people focus on chronic pain, how that runs in families. Of course it does. But when we really look at risk in other populations, so this was in a cohort of kids who had a parent with a mental health issue. So if your parent has a mental health issue like anxiety and depression, you are at high risk for mental health issues. It's an adverse childhood experience. It just is. But I partnered with this guy, a psychologist here in Calgary, Daniel Kapala-Sibley. He was following a group of kids who had parents with a mental health issue. And I said, we need to look at pain in these kids. And what this study showed, it was just published a couple months ago by Sabine Sultani, who works at the Adult Chronic Pain Clinic at Foothills here in Calgary. She showed that even controlling, when you kind of control for baseline mental health symptoms in these kids, right? Pain is predicting, right? 9 to 18 months later, first onset suicidality and depressive disorders, just 9 to 18 months later. So what we're learning, we always thought that, okay, if you have chronic pain, you're at risk for having depression and anxiety. That makes sense. It robs so much, and can be, associated with disability. But I think what's really compelling is the evidence coming out that pain is often what precedes the onset of mental health issues. So this is just one of many, many pieces of data showing this. And I think that's really important because it's getting pain, children's pain, on mental health agendas. So the talk today is about trauma. I am a memory researcher, so I'm always really interested in what people remember about painful experiences in their life and how that can influence their development. So I got interested in PTSD. PTSD is symptoms that you can experience after something bad and often life-threatening happens. So these are symptoms of re-experiencing or intrusive memories, hyperarousal, which can include, being startled, having sleep disturbances, alterations in your thoughts and your mood, and avoidance, right? You want to avoid any reminder of that bad thing that happened. And we had known for decades that adults who have PTSD, many of them have chronic pain, right? So that had been shown, but no one had really looked at this in kids. And when we looked at a group of kids with chronic pain and compared them to a group of kids and their parents who didn't have chronic pain, the differences in PTSD levels were striking. So you can see here about a third of the kids with chronic pain were saying they had clinically, like diagnostically elevated PTSD symptoms, compared to 8% of kids who didn't have chronic pain, and similar differences, albeit lower rates, in their parents. Okay. So this raises the question, right? Can trauma lead to chronic pain in kids? I won't bore you. I'm a psychologist who loves models, but I'm not going to bore you. But we saw this high co-occurrence. I think what's really interesting about this is that it's not just it's not just physically painful traumas that lead to, that are related to chronic pain. It's also emotional traumas, right? So, what is that about, and how does that sort of set the stage for chronic pain? So we have models. I'm happy to share any papers with people who are interested. What we do is basically look at, why does PTSD develop and why does chronic pain develop? And what are those factors that are shared between those two conditions? And we know that there are things like, cognitive biases, avoidance, sleep disturbances is a huge driver of both PTSD and chronic pain, a huge, huge driver. I'm going to talk more about that. We know that trauma and chronic pain can change the brain. And so there's shared brain regions that may account for why these two conditions go together. And when we focus on kids, we're focusing on parents. So what is the impact of trauma on a parent and how we parent? I could talk about that in another talk. I do a lot of clinical work actually with veteran populations, parents who have PTSD and chronic pain, to look at parenting and how to sort of what to target to kind of help the kids be more resilient. There's also shared neurobiology. So I am a psychologist. I'm more interested in the things that you can really change and interventions, but there's a neurobiology there. And of course we work with neuroscientists who are really interested in like the epigenetic and inflammatory changes that can happen both in the chronic pain and trauma states that can perpetuate these two issues. So when we follow kids who have chronic pain, now these are kids who wind up um, in the tertiary care setting. So we have to acknowledge that that is a minority of kids who suffer. We can talk about disparities later, but these are the kids that and parents that the kids have been. Most of them report having had chronic pain for about 4 years, and they tend to be about 14 years of age, though there's a range. And not surprisingly, right, the more disability, so the more pain is getting in the way of their life, the kids who come in with more disability, their pain is getting worse over time. But what's interesting is, right, controlling for their pain and their disability, if they have higher PTSD symptoms when they come into the clinic, their pain is getting worse over time. And these are kids who are getting what we would consider now to be sort of gold standard treatment. So trauma symptoms matter, right? Okay. So trauma symptoms are how the bad thing that happened to you influence you now. But we're also interested in, I'm trying to change the orientation of my Zoom box. Just bear with me for a sec. That's so much better. Okay. God, you'd think by now after 2020, I'd know how to do this. I've given like 50,000 talks on Zoom, but anyways. We're also interested in the things that happened to you. What happened to you? So I'm sure many of you know about adverse childhood experiences. It's 10 types of things that could have happened to you before the age of 18, okay? These include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and 5 types of household challenges, one of which is having a parent with a mental health problem, your mom being treated violently, substance abuse in the family, an incarcerated relative, and divorce made the list. So this is a huge area of research, since the 1999 study, which actually originated in primary care, by the way, a huge pioneering study by Folletti and colleagues. It has been documented that if you have a higher number of ACEs, your risk for mental and physical health issues is much higher, especially if you have 4 or more ACEs. Now, it's not deterministic, so I'd like to just say this is, averages and norms, but the risk is certainly higher. So this was the original Folletti study that was out of California at Kaiser Permanente, so a big HMO in the US. And these primary care physicians were doing, physical exams and seeing these patients, and they just noticed that a lot of them were talking about stuff that happened to them when they were kids. So they called these people on the phone, it was a couple of thousand people, and asked them about, at the time, I think it was 7 types of those ACEs. And the findings were striking. So there was a clear increased risk for a variety of, not surprisingly, mental health issues, right? So not surprisingly. But what was really compelling, right, is that if you had 4 or more ACEs, okay, in childhood, your risk for life-threatening physical health issues was much higher. So things like skeletal fractures, liver disease, cancer, heart failure, like it was really clear. So this is such a landmark study because it was really showing that what is happening, if you think about those ACEs, it is trauma and interruptions within primary attachment relationships, right? When you're a kid, the idea that what happens in your environment can indeed get under the skin and influence your mental and physical health. And there's a large literature on this I don't have time to get into, but if anyone's interested in this, I'm happy to share great resources. But it's clear that this risk is clear, and we've been documenting it for decades and decades. I'm of the mind that we need to start doing something about it. And some people are, and I gotta say, Calgary is a great place to live because there's some really cool, important, impactful research happening here in this area. So when we asked kids with chronic pain, we asked them about their ACEs, those 10 types of ACEs. You can see the rates here. I will say that the highest reported ACE that the kids talked about was a parent with a mental health issue. Not surprisingly, if the kids with chronic pain had higher levels of ACEs, it wasn't linked to worse pain, but it was linked to worse mental health, so depression, PTSD, etc. I'm going to hone in on one of those shared mutually maintaining factors, okay? So one of those drivers that are driving both PTSD and trauma symptoms and pain, and that is sleep disturbance. I used to think sleep research was really boring until I started seeing study after study, including our own. It is such a powerful, powerful predictor of pain and such a modifiable target. So if there's one take-home message, trauma is trauma is prevalent, right, in society. You'll see later, I talk about how we need to be trauma informed, and we really need to understand what that means and how to do that. It can make such a difference. But we also, when you see insomnia in patients and people, that is a massive driver of both chronic pain and PTSD. And we know that kids are sleep deprived. There are some public service announcements that are like, we need to do something about this. Like at the time of adolescence, it's called the perfect storm because there are things like phones and screen time and social pressures, but there's also neurobiological changes that are happening within adolescence, right? There is a circadian phase delay, there's a slow of sleep pressure, a slower rise. And so kids biologically don't want to go to bed as early or can't. And yet school start times become earlier. And it's just the perfect storm. And what we find is that at the onset of adolescence, kids are getting about an hour and a half less sleep. To put that in context, there are some great experimental studies showing that even 30 minutes less of sleep for a kid can lead to really significant disruptions in their cognitive and emotion regulation. So it's an issue that we need to be aware of and sort of asking about and targeting, early, especially at that, from that period. For the people that like the brain, there's a great paper that was led by my friend and colleague, Rochelle Machazik and Janaea Christensen, that really looks at the literature and reviewed the literature to look at what is shared in the brain and neurobiologically with sleep and chronic pain. And there are shared neurobiological and brain regions that may explain this connection between sleep deprivation and pain. And if we look at these big epidemiological studies, it's clear that even sleep problems in the toddler and preschool period is a risk factor. So it heightens risk for the onset of chronic pain in adolescence. And we see the same pattern between early sleep problems and the onset of mental health problems in adolescence. So when we look at kids with chronic pain who come into the chronic pain clinic, again, that is a subset of kids who suffer. There's many more that don't access tertiary care, which is why we need primary care here. And I'm so excited to give this talk and to partner with you all. We see that kids who come into the chronic pain clinic, when their pain and disability is worse, their pain is getting worse over time, even when they're receiving gold standard treatment. One of the reasons is because their sleep is disrupted. They're reporting insomnia, difficulties staying and falling asleep. Okay. But even controlling for pain, this connection between higher PTSD symptoms and a worsening of pain over time is explained in large part by sleep problems. So this is exciting, right? Because we're starting to see which kids are responding to our treatments, which ones aren't, and what might be other targets for these kids with these comorbidities. Sleep. And I will tell you, like, there are great resources, and this is a really growing area, and I'm happy to connect with resources and stuff about free treatments for kids to really target sleep and mental health and pain. I'm going to not spend too much time on this, but I want you to know that there is a neurobiology here. I work with Rochelle and her lab. She's in Australia, but she is actually a Calgarian, born and raised. And actually, she just messaged me. We're going to talk later. So we do a lot of work together. So I study kids and pain in kids and their parents. And she has these animal models where she's really looking at what's happening to the brains of these animals, right, as a model to understand what may be happening to people. So this is one particular model. So what she does is she randomizes she uses rats to either a high-fat, high-sugar diet or a normal diet, an enriched diet. This is to actually model socioeconomic disadvantage in the animal. She then randomly assigned. So half of the rats are raised by their moms, right? So they're reared as normal, but half of the rats are separated from their moms at birth. So that is an ACE that would be a sort of a model of neglect and an adversity early in life. That's the only difference between these animals. She then, as the rats grow up, she tests their anxiety and their pain behaviors. And then at around the time of adolescence, right, that corresponds to adolescence, all of the animals get a hind paw incision. Okay, so they all have an inciting, painful event. Now you'll note this is an emotional trauma or adversity, and they all are at birth, and then they're all exposed to pain. And then at the time of sacrifice, they actually take samples of their brain to look at epigenetic changes and inflammatory markers that can underlie this connection between early trauma and pain in adolescence. And she's shown that adversity, this early trauma, has cumulative and systemic effects on pain in the animal. And this early life adversity, this ACE, actually changes the developing brain over time. And the more adversity that this juvenile, animal is exposed to, the more. So there's cumulative effects on their altered brain development. So we have done some very preliminary work taking saliva samples from participating people in our studies, if they choose to and want to. And we can show that there are some overlapping epigenetic markers that we're seeing in these animal studies and in these people who are living with pain. So very interesting. And this idea of whether, this is an intergenerational issue is so compelling to me, right? Like, what happens to our ancestors can influence our health. That is really, really fascinating. And why I'm most fascinated in it is because this opens windows and doors for prevention, right? So we know that adverse childhood experiences, so if your parent experienced more and more adversity, there are reasons why that may confer risk to children. Most people have looked at risk for mental health issues or developmental concerns. And so there are biological pathways for that, epigenetic changes, brain changes. But also, when these things happen to you as a child, that influences the threat that you perceive and the way that you parent. And I am in no way blaming parents, okay? Like, you would not believe the resilience that I see in the work that I do. But when your own attachment relationships have been disrupted in your childhood and you become a parent, that can be really confronting and really challenging and a beautiful place for intervention and resources, right? Because we're showing that we can really break that cycle. This is a new paper led by my friend and colleague, Katie Burney, a great pain researcher here in Calgary. And our student, Jamie Beveridge. She reviewed all of the studies that looked at one particular ACE, so parent mental health. And she has shown in over 77 studies, I think were included, or 67 studies, that if your parent has a mental health issue, your risk as a child for chronic pain is much higher. When we ask parents of kids with chronic pain about their childhoods and what happened, look at the rates of ACEs here, higher than what we see in the kid. And look, that rate of mental health issues, so this would be in the child's grandparent, is up to 37.4%. So pretty relevant. But here's where the story changes. So we thought that if your parent had a lot of ACEs, right? These are in tertiary care seeking kids, okay, with chronic pain, that your pain would be really, really bad. But we did not find that. So the higher number of ACEs that your parent had, they were more likely to have chronic pain and PTSD themselves. But the child's pain and pain disability was not worse. Now, that doesn't mean that parental ACEs may not lead or confer risk for pain, but among this sample, it's not leading to like a worse level of disability. So that got us thinking about resilience, okay? And this is what I'm really, really excited about. This is a study that came out in JAMA Pediatrics that like really blew my mind, okay? They asked this group of adults about their ACEs, and then they asked them about, their psychological and social functioning. But they also asked them about 7 things that could have happened to them also before the age of 18. And these were positive childhood experiences. So you can see what those are now. These are the ability to talk to your family about your feelings, feeling that your family was supportive in difficult times, enjoying participating in community traditions, feeling a sense of belonging in high school, having 2 non-parent adults who care about you, feeling, my Zoom screen is over here, supported by friends, and feeling safe and protected by an adult at home. Okay. This is social support. This is having validating relationships, being able to talk about emotions. And they asked about this. The findings were so beautiful. So yes, if you had higher level of ACEs, if these things happened to you, the more things that happened to you as a kid, yes, you had more depression, you had more socio-emotional issues. But the more positive childhood experiences you had buffered or eliminated that risk. Another really compelling study that came out of Calgary by Jerry Giesbrecht and colleagues followed pregnant moms and followed their babies about a year later. And they found that trauma that the parents reported in pregnancy led to changes in the baby's stress, HPA axis, like stress response, but that risk was buffered by social support. And social support really was validating relationships, having someone that you could rely on in difficult times, right? Community support is an antidote and is so, so important to the physical and mental health and this risk between that trauma in early life can confer. So we are following in collaboration with Suzanne Tuff, Sheila McDonald, who lead the All Our Family study that maybe many of you have heard about. This is a beautiful study where they've been following about 3,000 pregnant moms. Okay, so from pregnancy, and they followed their babies and their children for several times. And the most recent time that they did data collection, the children were 13 and 14 years old. So in collaboration, what we've done is we have a gold standard assessment of pain at precisely that adolescent period where chronic pain can emerge. So we're able now to really, I think, like there's not data like this anywhere. It's so amazing to be here in Calgary, where we can ask questions about why does chronic pain develop in kids and what might we target earlier on, right, to prevent this. So we found in terms of trauma and pain that mothers who report having experienced abuse, when they're reporting this in pregnancy, whether they have experienced abuse as children or in adulthood, that is related to risk 13 and 14, 12 to 14 years later of their child having pain. But this risk is buffered by social support that is present in the toddler and preschool years. Like this to me is so hopeful and exciting. And I think, people who work with adults, many of them are parents, just to think about the potential that we have to really intervene with these kids earlier is really, really exciting. The ACEs that we focus on, this is the end of my talk, the next few slides, are really focused on what's happening between the caregiver or the family members and the child. But really, there's a move to really understand other types of traumas, other types of adversity that may have an even greater impact and that may be related to these ACEs, things like housing instability, poverty, food insecurity, substance abuse, domestic violence, discrimination, racism. All of these things are really, really, we need to expand beyond the 10 types of ACEs that Valetti, considered 20 years ago, and really understand these structural drivers of pain and mental health, and how we may be able to, start understanding the people with pain who do not reach tertiary care. That's why I think primary care is such and educational settings are such a powerful environment to start understanding this. I'm just going to flag that there are some amazing colleagues and collaborators, Anna Hood and Bonnie Mather, that have talked about the people who are not reflected in our pain research, right? People of color, Indigenous, Black communities, queer communities, kids with neurodevelopmental disabilities. This is really what we need to start seeing, because we know that when you have minoritized and marginalized identities, there are many, many reasons why you experience not only higher pain, but sources of injustice across societal, structural, interpersonal, and intrapersonal levels. Anna has talked about not just PTSD, but how racism-based trauma is this ongoing, perpetuating trauma that overlays with pain. So we're really trying to kind of zoom out and try to think about trauma and pain from from a broader lens. We published this paper in the Lancet saying that, living a life with chronic pain in and of itself, because it sort of disrupts and robs and removes social supports, which I've shown you is the antidote, right? Because of discrimination, diagnostic uncertainty, not being believed, marginalization, all of these things, that in and of itself, this life with pain can be a trauma, can be a catalyst for toxic stress. And so really understanding that we have traumas and we have pain, but pain itself, and so this again really casts shines a light on the importance of those social relationships, right? Of which your clinician is one. We are joining forces from North America to Africa to Australia to the UK, and we're coming together to really understand this connection between trauma and pain from a much broader lens. We have access to almost every cohort in the world that has assessed trauma, the traditional ACEs, but also the more structural ACEs. You can see poverty there, you can see discrimination. So we're hoping to convene together. We've got some great Calgarians who are part of this international collective to really start moving the needle to understanding trauma and pain, and really use this as for advocacy for the people that are not reflected so far in our research, and understand these structural drivers, which I think could be a really powerful tool for activism and advocacy for people with pain. I'll end by saying, pain care should be trauma informed. I think we need to understand what trauma informed is. And I don't think, I don't think we're doing enough in that area. Like, how do we avoid re-traumatization? How do we, should you really be asking adults about their childhoods? Not necessarily, right? But how can we treat people with that sort of knowledge, compassion, and creating those safe spaces to avoid re-traumatization, and to really appreciate that these two things really go hand in hand, and not just two things, many things. But I would say healthcare and society should be trauma informed. And I think for me, once I start diving into trauma, it's just the lens through which I see the world. I don't think everyone has experienced it. I know it's much more prevalent than we know, but it's such a driver for many of health issues, right? So I'll leave you with this poem by one of my favorite activists and poets, Alok, who wrote Beyond the Gender Binary. Alok lives with chronic pain and really attributes a lot of their pain to the transphobia and kind of structural injustices that they've encountered. They say, maybe pain is where language becomes physical. The integumentary system, the musculoskeletal, the lymphatic, the endocrine, If I could go back, I'd include more to the list: the economic system, the racial, the gender. Say this world is made up of systems that manage all essential body functions. They determine what lives and what dies. Show the transcripts from the legislative sessions, the comment sections, the dinner tables. Say, these are anatomy lessons. They determine who lives, who dies. One day when I die, rewind the heart attack. What power precipitated it? Unfurl the tumor. What policy prescribed it? Dissect the culture, not just my corpse. Diagnose the world. Hold one big stethoscope to its heart. Listen. Is it breathing or is it weeping? Thank you. I want to thank my students, not my students. I hate that ownership language. The students with whom I have the privilege of journeying with. They do amazing work, and really I'm just like the messenger. And I open it up. I'm here in Calgary. I'm here in Alberta. We really want to partner with primary care. We want to partner with, in mental health, in neurodevelopmental disabilities. We want to start getting pain on more agendas and work together with you guys. And so I just welcome exchange, not just here, but beyond. And thanks so much for listening and taking the time.
Thank you so much, Melanie. That's fantastic. I have been really looking forward to this talk, and I personally have about 1 million questions that I want to ask you. But I see there that Tina has a question in the Q&A. Tina, did you want to unmute and ask your question in real time? Or are you like, oh, there you are. Okay, awesome.
I can do that, but usually people can't hear me until I have my mic on.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Melanie. That was exceptional in terms of the compassion, obviously, that you have, but also to highlight how Calgary is a center of innovation for this, because that's helpful for me in terms of when I interact with patients and parents and families, because to me, this is like the people I work with, we've been talking about this for a while, but for the population and the general mass, this is not what they're hearing and not what they're getting. So I work primarily with adults, and I had a question in regards to, if we know that the social buffering system is really important in that toddler, early childhood stage, yet there's generations of people without that, do we know how much more help an adult or older teen would need in terms of support? Because I'm thinking about social interventions and all the supports that are needed, but we don't have funding for, and our models and our systems just don't provide that long-term care and that wraparound service that I think is needed.
Tina, awesome. Yes. Calgary is the Mecca, and like you're part of that, like it really is. I mean, I think we're really leading the charge in pain and mental health. And we are so excited to really kind of build these community partnerships. So if you're interested, like come join us, or let us join you. It's a great question. And so this research is really new. I was really surprised. I am increasingly surprised at how powerful, you look at those types of positive childhood experiences and those social supports, and you think, really? Like that, like despite all that epigenetic risk and all of those things. Look, what we know is, so I can't speak to like the study that shows this is what this developmental period, this is how much they need. Like I can't say that, but I can say that we know that earlier is better, right? Like it just is. The sooner we can, that's why I love this idea of prevention, and this idea of like, oh my gosh, what if we could be leaders in like at people doing adult care, if we could like get to their kids earlier or add parenting to that piece. Because even in really high risk populations, people experiencing, who have experienced domestic violence, or like high or like low SES kinds of socioeconomic or financial deprivation, like it's been shown that like these parenting interventions and stuff are really powerful. You are absolutely right. Like I have a friend who's a social worker who just told me that like the government has cut even more funding for these prevention programs. So it's, I understand. And I've had people say, like, what are we supposed to do? Fix poverty? Like, what the hell? And I understand how it can feel like, but I will also say that, like, this is why I think it can't all be in the ownership of us as clinicians or within the healthcare system, right? Like, and so yes, sometimes we need funding to get people to do these programs, but like we're starting to develop programs that are freely available. So the Power Over Pain portal, right? Like that is where we've been working on. It's funded, where we can kind of get resources, evidence-based resources that say primary care physicians could then direct their patients to, right? So it's not all under the purview of your care. And then, so these community and social supports, you know, it's not all things that have to be funded from the government, right? Like things like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, like things like, so like, how can we, like communities, many of them have solutions and they have traditions. Like, how can we link people to resources or give them this knowledge to give them some hope? Like so many parents feel like, oh my God, like I work with parents who have experienced like horrific traumas and like chronic pain, and like when they find out that there's so much resilience and that there are things that we can put in place, that is so therapeutic for them to know that there's like hope for their kids. And so like a lot of what I do as a psychologist, like talking about difficult emotions and communicating together, and like even that finding that like having two non-parent adults that care about your kid, like that's the auntie, that's the cousin, the community traditions, the free festival that's going on Saturday, you know, like I feel like there's a real opportunity for knowledge translation, even just there, and instilling hope. And I guess what I'd say is like, I want this research. What I like about research, okay, we have to work with clinicians because like, what do I do? And so like education is power, knowledge is power, and connecting to resources is power, right? Hope is power. Being believed is power. But I often think like we're missing the boat in terms of like, you know, I think adults who experience pain, like, yes, we have to find a way to manage and we have to find a way to like help them with interventions. A big part of their life is their children and sort of like that next generation. So I just think there's things that we could do. And I'm not saying like, okay, if you're Tina, if you're an adult clinician, like, okay, you better train up and retrain and be a pediatric, you know, physician. Like, I'm not saying that. But that's why I think like with partnership, like maybe there's more that we could give. Maybe there's more resources, you know. We're developing these this portal that's going to be, that is already, but it's even going to be better. So how do we get pain resources and mental health resources? Say you're seeing an adult and they're talking about their kid, hey, have you heard about this? It's like free, you know, your kid could use it if you ever needed it. And so I guess what I'd say is like, how much do you need the older or that the more entrenched the problem? That was your question, right? I have seen people turn it around who've been through horrific traumas and pain. Like there is resilience. We are capable of it. And with community, I mean, this is anti-racism. Like this is like decolonizing care, is understanding our interconnections and really trying to foster that. So just know, like, let's come together. How to, like, what's little things that you could give to your patients in this context? What are more research while we're over here trying to develop these research and this knowledge and these solutions but we got to come together, right? And so earlier is better, of course, but my gosh, I am always wowed by the ability to turn it around. And even if someone in their own lifetime, and it's really hard in their struggles, understanding how the next generation could be protected, like people care about that, you know? Anyways, long-winded answer, Tina, I'm sorry, but like, let's stay in touch.
That could launch 100 other conversations, because it's interesting, you know, there's that sort of macro, there are things we can do on a societal level to reduce ACEs for kids. You know, I donate to the United Way because there's so much in my clinic that I can't do in terms of the ACEs that have already happened. There's also, you know, you've done lots of work when you talk about memory in terms of Like, what's the impact on kids in how their parents talk about pain? So even
Yeah.
things like that, do you want to say anything more about
Tina,
that?
I miss you. You turned off your video. I'm just joking. But I was like, I really like seeing you. No, it's okay. You don't have to. I really like your background too. Yeah, like, so guys, I know how this might sound like fluff. That's why I'm trying to show you the research. And maybe it seems like not fluff. Like, I don't know. But I will tell you that, like, if I had to boil down, and we have research kind of show, if I had to boil down, okay, if you have a parent or an adult who has chronic pain and trauma, and I mean, I take all kids, like, from this, like, I'm not someone who's like, I need the kid with the unified problem and no other problems. Like, I'm like, messy, come on. If I had to boil down what you can modify to talk to address what you said, talking about difficult emotions, communication within families about difficult emotional experiences. I just got back from San Diego. I mean, I'm happy to do some stuff with you guys. Like, I teach parents and clinicians, like, validation. Now that seems Captain Obvious, but it's actually not, but it's not that hard. And so like that is a powerful intervention. That was on the list. That wipes out risk, even in the face. What I love about it is, like, these things, like, knowing how to validate your kid, right? Like, last night I went out for dinner with, I have my kids half the time. And my daughter was telling me about this relentless bully, right? And she's like really upset. And I'm like, how do I talk to her about it? And by the way, I've done everything wrong. So I'm not the psychologist here saying, like, I'm perfect. I'm not. But, like, that's the other thing. Like, we don't have to be. But encouraging within families, right, of how to have difficult conversations, right, in a validating way, encouraging, connections with the community, right, is powerful. And yeah, so Lori, I have done work in the area of acute pain and things. This is all connected. You can teach people how to talk, to have conversations, and that is powerful. It changes what they remember about their life. It actually reduces emotional dysregulation. It does. And so that's what I would say. Understanding mental health and pain, understanding what it is, right? Knowledge is power, but that's not enough. And within families, having difficult conversations, talking about emotions, understanding that there are no bad emotions. We all have them, and not suppressing them. Having validating conversations, knowing when to walk away and when to come back together. Sounds basic. It is powerful. And so there are things that we can do. And Calgary is the Mecca. Like, we're working on it. And so when I say I'm interested in prevention, I am, but that's not to say, like, I'm not interested in intervention. And the fact that those techniques can buffer risk even when you've experienced neglect and abuse. Wow. Like, that's hopeful. That's powerful, right? And yes, Yasmin, I'm happy to share my slides, happy to share any papers, any resources. We really want to work more with you guys. We want to partner in primary care and in mental health. And so, yeah, I think this is not the last time you're going to see me, if that's okay with you.
I am going to drag you back many times. Laura,
Yeah.
you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. It's actually two-part. So I know we focus a lot on parent mental health, but is it reasonable to assume that any household member who is experiencing struggles with their mental health can have that kind of impact on kids?
Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Laura. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Sort of seems like a dumb question, but
Oh
I just kind
yeah.
of wanted to check in
Oh.
on that because
Okay. Thank you so much. And I was using parents, and I shouldn't have, because it's not
Yeah.
just parents. Caregivers. Like, this is like
Yeah.
developmental, right? Like,
Yeah.
any attachment relationship that you have,
Okay.
whether that's a neighbor or a nanny or a
Right.
whatever it is, or a sister or
I was
a
going to say
friend.
sibling or
Yeah.
aunt, uncle
Oh,
type of thing in the household or grandparent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you,
Okay.
Laura. It's such an important point because like in some families, you can't fix, like, I'm not saying there's not
Yeah.
resilience, but I'm saying like the way to help in some families is to kind of activate those other connections, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so important. Yeah. So any sort of attachment relationship, the research on attachment is like, if you want to have at least one or two people in your life where it's safe and you can go to when bad things happen and they're consistent, right? If it's not your parent, if it's not your grandparent, right? You just need someone, right? Hopefully two. And so very, very good point. Absolutely. And so it's funny, we're doing this co-design where we partner with people with lived experience, by the way. I should have said that. Like, people living with trauma and pain are core. They're driving the agenda. And many of them are like become my best friends, to be honest. And we make sure that when we develop solutions for this, we don't make it so that like if a parent doesn't want to be part of it, that's okay. Someone else can. It's like if we need to get this out to whoever. And if we just need someone. We need someone who's consistent, who's safe, who we can validate us, who can be there. Social support does not have to be within your biological family. You can have chosen family and it's protective. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Community is the antidote, hey? Like it is.
Well, I work closely with Yasmin and in the community that she works in, and in permanent supportive housing and in housing first sort of models. And these are environments that are super, super skinny on anything but the bare bones resources. And even now in long-term care, where we're seeing younger and younger individuals being placed in these environments because they have unpredictable behaviors. They need unscheduled care. They can't be managed or supported in other environments. And we rely so heavily on medical models of care as opposed to a holistic or a social model of care. And it's I hope that we can see some of this knowledge be
Laura,
mobilized.
I am absolutely 1,000% with you. And I will tell you, like, my colleague and friend, Katie Burney, is like, she's so good for me. Cause like, she's saying what you say, you got to get this out there. We got to mobilize this stuff. And I think, again, I say like anti-racism, decolonizing care, et cetera, like, more communal approaches. It's not new. It's just not hardcore embedded within the biomedical model. I'm with you. And yeah. So I will tell you, probably 95% of research that's funded for pain is looking at the spinal cord and the gene and the NY5 receptor on the blah, 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 d. And that's important. But we need, and it is important. And that's why I'm like so excited. And this international collective I was telling you about, like, we've got the neuroscientists there. But they're the minority now. We've got more people. We've got Indigenous, Black scholars. We've got people with lived experience. And we're like, okay, we need to understand this stuff too and work together, right? But I'm with you. I can tell. We're going to get along. But we're all going to get along.
Well, there's so much room for us to learn more about what would be the recipe if you have a 10-minute visit with somebody with chronic pain who's in their 40s and has 3 children. Do you have thoughts about what would be the brief intervention to try to get at the kids?
Lori, way to throw a low ball. No, I love you. It's okay. I really like Lori, y'all. I do. And that is the stuff I was talking about in San Diego. They gave a 3-hour workshop with a patient advocate I can't call her a patient, actually. She's an activist, person with lived experience, but where validation, what is it? How do we listen to believe, not listen to respect, right? Like listen to believe, convey that empathy, instill hope. So some of this stuff, like Lara's talking about knowledge, instill hope, link to community resources. So yes, you do your stuff. You got to do your stuff. It works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for all. But it's those pieces, because this validation stuff is core. And I'd be happy to talk more about it. You know, we're doing a lot of work on it, but there's a lot of medical trauma. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of medical trauma. There's a lot of systems that have let, you know, especially marginalized and minoritized people down. And so it seems like a tall order, right? To have that one encounter and get someone to undo years of, you know, that. And yet, one clinical encounter can be transformative. And I've seen it time and time again. It's in people's narratives. There is a hero in their story after decades sometimes. And it is that one clinician who they connected with, who like they really knew, believed them, had hope, you know, and they had a community where they were able to form a community. And what would I do? Are you a parent? Right? Like, can I, you know, like, whoa, what an opportunity. So instilling hope, and I'd link the kid to resources. It's not on you, but gosh, if we could do that. Yeah, I want to do it with you. I really do.
Well, let's
You
do
all.
that. I think
Let's do
like
it.
there's lots of room for us to develop kind of a bit of a toolkit for primary care to say, like, you know, what are the prevention things that you can do for people with pain who have kids who are potentially at risk? Because the sort of thing about family medicine is we have this opportunity with a family unit
Yes.
often where, you know, we have more of an insight into that than you do maybe in specialist care, that where you're seeing one very small little subset of the problem.
Like 1,000%. The opportunity and the power for intervention and prevention that you have is like, it's unprecedented. Like it's even more than schools. It's even more, it's actually the milieu where I think we can move the needle the most. And I'm not blowing smoke. Like I really believe it. And no one's really thinking about pain intergenerationally. Like I'm not just interested in saying like 50% of kids who have pain have parents with pain. No, but like, let's do something about it, right? And that's also decolonizing. I mean, like our ancestors, like we want to make the next generation better. I mean, we all do. And so Lori, I'm with you. Lara, the wounded storyteller, Arthur Frank. Are you kidding me? Let's like stories matter. And they're always evolving. And we tell them for a purpose. And you become a character in their story, right? And I believe in the, you know, to go back to what Tina was saying, like we always are rewriting our story. And you have such power in that, even in one encounter. I see that. I know that to be true, right? But let's link the generations. And then, you know, I think Alberta, I think we could do it together. I really do. I think we could do it. And I'm telling you, by the way, like we have put in funding, like we want primary care is we got our eye on it. Like we want to work together. We really do. And I'm really hopeful that this will come through so we can do this. It's really not just talk, that we can actually like turn it into a reality.
There's lots of potential for sure. And I would encourage anybody who hasn't, if this is the first time you're hearing of Professor Noel, have a look at some of the things that she's written and published on this, because it's really cool. There's some really, really cool stuff. There's some really kind of scary stuff about just the impact of intergenerational trauma and pain, but also some really encouraging stuff about things that we can do to make a difference and windows of opportunity. So
And thanks, Lori. And I will say, like, we have evolved. Like, we're not interested in characterizing problems anymore. Like, we're not doing that kind of research. Like, we are really about partnership, advocacy, right? Not doing the study to say it's a problem and then 17 years later, like, doing something about it. So I think we're into solution mode now and partnership. And so there's been a crescendo in that direction, and it's so much better, to be honest. And pain disparities and equity and justice, you know, like that's what we want to, that's what we got to do together.
Yeah, there's so much advocacy work we can do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie. This has been fantastic and thought-provoking, and lots of more discussion to be had on this topic, I'm pretty sure. So to our participants, thank you very much for joining us today. There will be a link that will be showing up in your email for an evaluation, as well as where to go for the recording of the session. And please let us know your feedback, ideas for where we can go from here, and what you would like to see next. And we will have the planning committee and Professor Noel stay behind for just a second, but ask everyone else to find your lovely little red leave button in the bottom corner and